Okay, so now we can get to the actual meat and potatoes of what we're talking about. Um, so basically, just to remind everyone what we're talking about, I have asked City Crusher to give me his opinion on why, according to him, we have incels right now in society, right?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe it should be said that there is a little bit more things that go implicitly with that question, right? So the first thing that I'm basically like that always is in there is basically why do we now have to deal with such an issue, right? Why is this an issue now? Like we are basically talking about an incel epidemic, etc. Would you agree with that assessment that that's basically the question that is in the room?
Well, yeah, it sounds like that.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, there's like this baked-in assumption that incels, like involuntarily celibate men, never existed before, and it's only a recent phenomenon. Yeah, that it the
Yes.
yeah that's the
Yes.
implication.
Yes, I know that you disagree with that, but
Mm-hmm.
I know that you disagree with that, but uh, I mean, you're. We can go into that. So, as far as I know, my understanding is
Mm-hmm.
that we have evidence that for like if we look at our genes, that we have evidence that just a minority of males has basically reproduced, and therefore we can assume that there have been like sexless, like majority of men were basically sexless throughout most of history.
Yep, that seems to be the
Yes,
case. Yeah.
that seems to be the case. But and in that regard, I think we're agreeing. But if we look at the last couple of 100 years, depending on where in where you are geographically, we have seen like basically monogamy,
Yeah.
marriages, and basically a huge, like an overwhelming uh, amount of men basically being in relationships and uh, basically reproducing.
Yeah. Yeah. Um.
So that's basically where I'm coming from. So my intention, my when I ask that question, I'm basically asking from how do we get from that society to where we are now? Like how do we get from the last couple, I don't know, 400, 500,000 maybe years? Like if we look at, I don't know, it could even be thousands of years, maybe 1 to 2,000 years, where we have lived in like strictly monogamous relationships and everybody was basically reproducing, like almost all men were reproducing, um, and now basically going to a place where we are basically again where we were um, in prehistoric times.
Yeah. I mean, so we have to look at pair bonding, not just in terms of like romance and love and all of that, but also in terms of necessity. So,
Wait, can you just before you go there, can you say if you agree with that? Like if we agree with my assessment that I've just made, like are we on the same page in that regard, or do you have any contentions with that?
um, no, I think this is probably accurate.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not 100% sure if like almost every man reproduced like 100 years ago or something. I would have to look into that.
I mean, I've already given like examples. Like, if you just look in the in countries that are today like still living like people were living like I don't know 100 years ago, or even like 20 years ago, you could find like easily in rural areas in the Middle East, you can find societies where you have basically monogamy.
Hmm.
Everybody is getting married and there is basically no one being left out of the dating market, just like very rare. And usually it is like in relationship to some form of retardation, and even in those cases, like if it's not like a severe mental health retardation or something like that, usually people get married up because like basically people are out of the market, right? And everybody wants to get married, so at some point just there's just a couple of people left and they just end up with each other, right?
Yeah. Um,
Yeah.
So the thing is, the Industrial Revolution. So basically, women worked before the Industrial Revolution, right? So there's this idea that women were not allowed to work or something, but this is false. This is a falsehood. Women did work before the
Wait,
Industrial Revolution, and
yeah,
yeah, I'm giving some context, right?
okay.
So if women worked alongside out of economic necessity with their husband, with men, right? But then came the Industrial Revolution, right? And society became more prosperous, right? More technologically advanced. And that created a situation where women basically said, okay, we leave the rest of the work to the men by and large. Okay.
Wait,
And
are you now getting into the explanation of why you think that we shifted from a monogamic to from monogamy to serial monogamy, basically?
yeah, pretty
Okay,
much.
but I would prefer that we talk about this a little bit later, because right
Mhm.
now we are just basically asking the question, like, do you see why basically um how this shift is basically baked into the question, right? So when I'm asking why do we have incels according to you, what I mean is how did this shift happen from this monogamous state to the, so you, we agree on that part, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's serial monogamy has increased during recent history. Yeah, that seems to be the case.
Okay, and now basically I would like to Steelman City Crushers answer to that. Okay, so he's saying it's because women don't like men. Okay,
Hmm.
and so if we just take this at face value as a sentence, um we can now look at basically what has happened in this structure, and can see if that makes any sense, and then we can make like more generous interpretations of women don't like men means. Okay, so
Well,
the
I actually know what he means.
yeah, I think I think I know as well what he means, but I think we should go about it methodically. So what options do we have if we see that more men are single than women, right? That's what basically an incel crisis would mean. Otherwise, we would call it an loneliness epidemic, right? Where both men and women are single to equal parts. But basically, what we're talking about here is an asymmetry between men and women, correct?
Yeah.
So what would be the cause? What could be the cause of that? Like one cause could be that women are way more often homosexual, right? That could be one reason.
Uh,
That would leave a lot of
well,
men alone, right?
well, I mean,
No, I'm just
theoretically,
asking. It's not. I just it's a theoretical question. I'm not saying that's the case, but that would
uh,
basically make sense, right?
I mean, hypothetically, sure.
Hypothetically, yes, yes. So in a theoretical model, that would make sense, right? That would leave like that would give us an asymmetry between man and woman in terms of
Mhm.
singlehood, right? Because otherwise, if men are single, then the woman has to be single as well, right? Because they're building a pair. But that's not really the case. So it's not really, we don't really have overwhelming evidence that women are way more like homosexual than men are, right? So that's not a good explanation. So the only other explanation is that actually there is more men with multiple women than there is women with multiple men. Does that make sense?
More men with multiple women, and I
More
mean,
more men with multiple women than women with multiple men.
I
So
mean,
polygyny versus polyandry, basically. That's the only
well,
way you end up with more single men versus and less single women.
Well, these women, they deselect low status men, and we see an increase in low status men, and women increasingly only go for the top
That's
1% or 10%.
but they would
So
have to be, they would
if
have
you
to
mean
have
that,
multiple women, right?
well, yeah, they have a greater access, or yeah, they have a access to a greater pool of women. These
Okay.
high status men, yeah, sure.
Okay. So basically the idea is that they deselect men for other men, right? That's you don't believe that the actual problem that we're talking about is women becoming homosexual or women staying lonely, right? That's not what's happening. What's actually happening is that they're deselecting men for other men, right?
Well, yeah, but
Yeah. So
well,
in that
well,
so through that
they also
lens,
they also stay single longer though.
yeah, but
It's not.
if they stay single longer, we wouldn't have an asymmetry between men and women, and that's what we're talking about when we're talking about an
Well,
incel epidemic, right?
well, it does contribute to that. If single women don't choose any man,
Yeah,
then and we, I mean,
but that's
sure,
not the phenomenon that we're talking about. Like when we're
yeah,
talking
yeah,
about the male loneliness epidemic, then we always
right,
talking about an asymmetry between men and women, and
yeah, yeah.
at you know, so women staying single wouldn't contribute to that phenomenon that we're talking about. Like the only thing that would actually contribute to an incel epidemic or a male loneliness epidemic is women deselecting men for and then being with other men, right?
Yep.
So from that, just through that lens, would you not agree that it makes no sense to say that women don't like men as a general statement? So
Well,
the
it depends what is meant by that
okay,
statement, actually.
so yeah, so now we have to go deeper basically.
Yeah,
So
and
now basically the idea is that okay, maybe if you want to give the explanation of what he means, I know where you're going to, but maybe you go ahead and explain.
look, look, just because a woman chooses a man doesn't mean necessarily that he likes that man.
Yeah.
Okay, so it depends on the motivation, right? So if a man chooses a woman, wait, you're going?
I'm just
So
getting something to drink. I'm listening to you.
oh, okay, okay. So if a man chooses a woman, it is because of that woman's innate characteristics, right? He chooses that woman for her beauty, her personality, her intelligence, her charm, etc. Okay, for basically the woman herself. That the same is not true when a woman chooses a man. Basically, the woman chooses the man for what he can provide. That is basically what we see uh, as a general pattern. Okay, and I can give you an historical example of this where we can
No,
actually see that.
maybe we don't need the historical examples. I think we know what you're
I
talking
think we
about.
do. I think we
But
do
you know,
because
an
I can actually
example,
prove that.
an example is not a proof.
Well,
You know that, right?
I can illustrate that though.
I mean, but illustrating would only serve the purpose of us understanding more what you mean. But actually, I understand quite well what you mean. I can, if you want, I can strawman your position, and I can even I can steelman your position, and give you the just the meaning of what you're saying. What you're saying is basically that women's relationships is transactional to men, and men's relationship to women is not as transactional to women, right? That's what you're saying.
Basically, yeah.
Okay. So I don't think
And
we need to
that's
go
what.
into examples.
Yeah, I mean, this is basically what City Crusher means. He
Yeah, yeah,
means that.
sure. I know. So basically he's pointing at the transactional nature of the female to male attraction.
Mhm.
Correct? Okay. So
Yeah.
so if we go from there, so I have a couple of issues with that, right? So the first issue I have with that is that when I look at this period of time that we're talking about, we're looking at a time in which, like, at this time where basically there was monogamy, where the relationships were a lot more transactional than they are right now, according to both of our
Uh,
definitions, I think, right? So we can
I'm
agree
not
that
sure what you mean.
in a traditional society, we know that people would not strictly get married out of love, right? Like, it was rarely out of love that people got married. Like, it was rarely out of, I don't know if you even believe in something like love or sexual attraction. It seems like in your model there is no space for that, but just from my perspective, like, because I
There's
believe,
space for that.
okay, like, also, like, I believe that there is female to male love that exists, and there is female to male sexual attraction, as well as, like, human sympathy, like stuff like sympathy. So if we look back at, if you agree with that this exists, even better, then we both basically have the same perspective. So basically what we can see is that in the past, the relationships were formed not based on not based on these feelings of sympathy, sexual attraction, love, but they were mainly based on actual transactional uh, reasons, right? So money, status, political reasons, families making arranged marriages, etc., right? So, and then fast forward to today, and these reasons that I've cited, like sexual attraction, sympathy, love, are way, way, way more common right now than they were back then. But today we have an incel epidemic, and back
No,
then we didn't
no,
have it, right?
I, I, I I disagree heavily with what you said. That
Mm-hmm.
what you said there. No, there's still transactional. These transactional patterns are still there, and I would say even more pronounced. Like
Okay, there are
women,
more
and
than,
they're even.
yeah,
Wait, let me finish.
sure, sure.
There are even papers talking about how women's focus on a man's income has increased over time since I think the 80s. So it's absolutely not true that women are no more focused on like men's personality or whatever.
So
No, they're more than ever focused on men's status and men's income. There's an
you think that,
increasing pressure on men.
sure, you think that in if we look at, like, Middle Eastern society, in a rural Middle Eastern society right now, which would be very similar to uh how marriages would be formed, or relationships would be formed, like, I don't know, 60, 70 years ago in Europe, uh would we see more women getting into a relationship with a man out of love, or less?
I mean, we don't know because there's the confounding factor of
What do you think?
arranged marriages.
Yeah, what do you
I,
think? Do you think, like, 200 years ago in Western Europe, there were more women marrying their husbands out of love than today, or less?
I have to stay agnostic on that. I have no idea
I I
because,
I, I really sure.
yeah, I
Like,
mean,
you do have, like, history books, like, right? Like, you do read, like, ancient, I don't know, ancient, like, novels about ancient times, or novels that were written, like, I don't know, 200 years ago or something like that.
I mean, when I
Have you
look
read
at
any
history,
Dostoevsky?
I read a bit of Dostoevsky, but this is fictional works, whatever,
Okay.
and
Okay, so
it's written
that's
by a man. So
okay. So
if we look at,
you don't think it's an accurate depiction, like, even remotely an accurate depiction of its time?
maybe, I listen. The
Wow.
point is
I mean, I think
the
that's a little bit. I don't know. I think that's a little bit scary, to be honest. That you're not able to basically, you staying agnostic on something that for most people, for like 99% of people, is like a very, very obvious thing, that arranged
wait.
marriages, political marriages, marriages for status, marriages for money, were way more common like 200 years ago than today.
Well, I don't see any evidence that. I mean, yes, we have like in the Western Hemisphere, we don't have arranged marriages.
No, but like
But women still marry men for status. I mean, okay,
I'm
maybe
asking
like
you about
5 or
the
10%
evolution.
less.
Sorry?
Look, the I get your point, okay, but I don't have any reason to believe that the basic pattern of female hypergamy shifted to where they are now more focused on a man's personality or something. I mean, look,
Do you think that
if
women had more say, more say, less say, or equal say in who they were getting married to? Like 200, 300 years ago?
uh, well, probably less
Probably
because of
less, right? So,
probably less
so,
because of
so,
certain
so
uh,
if, yeah,
socioeconomic necessities,
yes,
right? But
yes.
also men had less say, right?
Yeah, so you're saying that
So,
most of the marriages were arranged? Is that what you're saying?
um, well, it depends what time period, what place.
Bro, it doesn't
Yeah,
really,
sure.
I mean, it doesn't really matter. It's just the point that I'm getting at is that actually the relationships were at some point in time, like a few hundred years ago, were extremely transactional, right? So, and like
Yeah, and
even from both sides to a certain
they still
extent.
are though.
And I'm asking you if I'm not saying that they're not at all. I'm just saying there were a lot more, and now they're way less transactional. There is way more women. If you
Um,
believe in something
I
called
don't,
love,
I
if you
don't.
believe in something called love, if you believe in something called sexual attraction, if you believe in something called sympathy, all of these things are way higher determining factors than 200, 300 years ago. You can still say that they're not relevant and blah blah blah, but they were way less relevant like 300 years ago. At least we can agree on that, right?
Again, I think this is speculation. So
you
because
you really
also
think that
also
it was way as
also
common as today that people would get married out of love like
I
300
mean
years ago
again,
as like today?
I mean usually when there's like arranged marriage happened back in the day, the parents would look at that potential husband or wife or whatever and would see if everything fits.
Back in the
And
day,
I mean
right?
sure, yeah,
Yeah, but today
but
we have way less of that, right?
sure.
Okay. And what
I
I
mean
mean,
look. The thing is, we can say, look, maybe yeah, marginally like personality or something or sympathy or
wait,
whatever matters
I,
more.
I'm
We
not
can
saying
say that,
that. I'm not even
but
claiming that right now.
it's still relevant. It's still
I'm not
relevant.
I'm not claiming that right now. I'm just saying we can see that relationships in the past have been way more transactional than today. But yet back in the like at that point in time, we had almost no incels. Like we had like basically
Again, I would have to
monogamy.
see some evidence. I would have to see some evidence for this
You just
because
agreed with
first
that
of all,
basically.
um,
You just
well,
said
okay,
you
okay,
just said
look,
two things. You agreed with me on two points. You agreed with me that if a couple hundred years ago there were almost no incels, and you agreed with me that a couple hundred years ago the relationships between men and women were way more transactional than they are right now, on average, statistically. And if these two things are directly correlated, we could see a correlation between there, but these right now we're looking basically at a negative correlation. Obviously there could be other factors that are basically so that have basically changed things so dramatically that it has overthrown the effects that the reduction of transactionalness had. But basically, right now we're looking at one piece of evidence that doesn't look so promising, that transactional nature of relationships is a very high predictor for having a lot of incels. It seems like with reduced transactional nature of, so with women going more for criteria like love and sympathy, it seems like they are they're choosing, they're deselecting more men when they go for that. They deselect. It seems like they're deselecting less men when they're going for transactional reasons.
Look, I think that we have to be more specific here. Okay, when I said, or you said that I agreed that there were almost no incels back in the day or something. Um, well, here's the thing about that. I would say that when we look at, for example, the like Europe, maybe 100, 200 years ago or whatever, like post industrialization or urbanization or whatever, yeah, there are probably some men who have been thrown out of the factories or who couldn't find a job in like urban areas, who pretty much struggled also with finding a spouse, right? So if I falsely
Yeah, I
agreed
agree.
on that
Basically
premise,
where it all starts, right? That's where all of these phenomena like basically start to get more and more until we get to the point in
yeah,
time where we are now. It doesn't
that
happen
feeds into
from
my point.
no,
That
but
feeds
I'm
into
basically
my point.
talking. But I'm basically talking about the time. Like there is a point in time. There is a point in time, and you agree with that pre-industrialization, if you want, where this phenomenon hasn't started yet, and basically, or maybe it has, but it has no effects yet. And you have basically rural areas where everyone is getting married. You agree that this existed, right? With everyone, I obviously don't mean like literally everyone, but like 90% of people were getting married, right? You agree that
Yeah,
that point in time existed, right?
well, but the thing about that is that was
Can you say yes
basically
or no?
out of that was out of necessity.
It doesn't matter, but you agree that that point in time existed, right? Where this was the case, correct?
Pretty much seems like that.
I mean, it is like we both know that it is like that, right? That's like a ridiculous point to argue. So if we know this point in time existed, and now I am asking you that point in time, do you think at that point in time when we look at a rural area where everyone was getting married, do you think that the relationships in this area and in this era were more transactional than today or less transactional than today? Do you think women back then were making more choices that were transactional or less choices that were transactional than today? And I think that question, the answer to that question is also pretty obvious. Like that today there is way more women who choose their spouse out of love and sexual attraction and sympathy than back in the day. You can still say it's very negligent and small and blah 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 blah. It's not really important, but it's still more than back then, right?
Well, maybe, but the
Why
thing is, this
maybe?
is not.
Wait, what's the doubt? Where is the doubt coming from?
Well, the doubt is coming from you're making a lot of assumptions that we don't really have the data for.
Okay, so you
And
don't believe that there exists a point in time where almost everyone was getting married? You don't believe that? Like that's like insane. Like nobody basically contests it.
well, yeah, sure, but
So you do agree with that? And do you also agree that back in the day, like at that exact time that you're talking about, also women were choosing their spouses very transactionally? Do you disagree with that? Do you have any doubt about that?
I mean, if there were arranged marriages, they were not choosing, but like both the husband and the wife were not choosing then. So
Never, no,
again, that
never, no one was choosing their spouse.
I wouldn't say never no one, but
So the ones that did,
there
the
was
ones that did,
arranged marriages.
so the ones that were not arranged, the ones where basically the woman had any say in in the marriage, do you think compared to today she was choosing her spouse for less transactional reasons or for more transactional reasons? Like, do you think she was looking for, like, do you think you would find more women that were looking for a rich husband than today, or less women that were looking for a rich husband than today?
I think that women, I mean, there were less educational opportunities for both men and women,
The
right?
reasons are not important. Like, it's a simple either or question, right? Like, do you think that back in the days there were more women that just married out of love when they had a say in their spouse? That just do, or do you think today people get more married out of love?
Again, it depends on what you mean by love. So
I thought
women
you know
are
what love is.
attracted.
Like, that's why I asked you, do you believe in love? And you said yes. And back then you knew what love was.
Yeah.
And I think I know what love is as
Okay.
well. Have you experienced love?
Well, I have experienced love as a
Great. Then
man,
we both
but
know what love is, right?
we talk about what women love, though. That is a different question,
I
right?
asked you. I
Women
asked you
love,
specifically. Do you think that female to male love exists? And you said yes, right?
yes, but it
So
depends
that's
what
what
we
we're
mean
talking
by
about.
that.
Yeah,
It
but
depends what we
before you
mean by
knew what
that.
I okay, do you believe that? Have you ever experienced female to male love?
What do you mean by that?
The
Female
thing
to,
that you said that exists, like I asked you, if do you think that I asked you, do you think that female to male love exists? And you said yes. And at that point, it seems like you knew exactly what I was saying. And now basically you're saying, what do you mean by that? I mean, I think love,
look,
like everybody that has
we
experienced
don't.
love knows what that means, right?
I think we don't need to overcomplicate things here. Okay.
It's just
The
basic logic, bro.
women,
It's not overcomplicating. I'm just
when we,
asking you. I'm just asking you a couple of easy questions, and I think you should be able to answer them. It's not that deep.
yeah, so what, again, this ties in what I said first. What women love about men is what men can provide, and that has been true throughout history, even today.
Okay, do you
So
think that was more the
finish
case
on that,
back then?
basically.
Do you think it was more back then, or do you think it was less back then, or do you think it was equal back then as today?
Again, there
It's
are,
so easy, such an easy question.
it's not an easy question because there is the confounding factor of arranged marriages, right?
we
So
we have already discarded of them, the ones where the woman has a say in the marriage. Do you believe that those
yeah,
existed, or do you think
what?
that all marriages back in the day were all arranged marriages, or do you think that women had a say in choosing their spouse?
Yeah, women probably had a say, but the thing is,
Okay, and now I'm asking you for those cases. Okay, I'm not asking you about arranged marriages. I'm asking you for those cases where women had a say. Okay, in these cases, do you think that I would find more women 300 years ago that married out of love, or would I find today more women that married out of love, or attraction, or sympathy, or sexual attraction? Like, these are all non-transactional goals, right? So I'm asking you basically, would I find more of them 300 years ago or more of them today?
yeah, again, this is not leading us anywhere because we don't have any concrete evidence either
You don't
way.
believe that
So,
the answer to this question is like obvious to like 99% of people? Like the answer to this
well,
question, do you really think that people that are watching this are convinced of when you're saying, yeah, we don't really know, like bro, we basically you've said it yourself. Women were basically back in the days were pretty dependent on men, and on their income and what they made. So it's pretty an
yeah, they're
obvious
less
thing.
dependent now. They're
Yeah,
less
they're less
dependent
dependent
on
now.
them.
So
Yeah, but
obviously that will
still,
taint their that will obviously taint that,
dependence alone doesn't determine.
but there will
This,
obviously taint the amount of there would obviously influence the amount of women who would choose out of transactional reasons, right? Like if the women are less dependent today, that would result in more women choosing for sexual attraction, for sympathy, for love. that's like such an obvious thing. Like that's such an obvious thing. Like that's why I feel like I don't know. It starts. I don't want to accuse
Okay,
you, but it feels like it
listen.
feels a little dishonest that you're like
Okay,
saying you're agnostic about it and you have no idea like how it was back in the days. I don't know. It's I'm a little bit skeptical, to be honest.
yeah. So even if I would grant you the point about, yeah, women have less dependence on men today economically, so therefore they have more freedom to choose men for other qualities. This doesn't debunk any kind of, or this doesn't refute the more general case that women's priorities is still the man's.
This refutes. You know what this refutes? I think that's where you got lost. You know what this refutes?
I didn't
This,
get lost.
but you seem lost because you're saying that it doesn't refute something that I never claimed it refutes, right?
Well, you're
Like the
trying
thing
to
that I'm
say,
no, the thing that I'm refuting with this is that this points to the fact that this points to like at least this gives an indication of uh the transactional nature or the transactionalness of relationships not being a determining factor whether men are being deselected or not. It seems like the more women, the less women are transactional, the more men are being deselected. And if I ask
well,
City Crusher, why do incels exist? Why are men being deselected? And he's basically saying because women are loving just transactionally, then that makes no sense because it seems to not make any
it's
sense
still,
because there seems to be a
well,
counter correlation.
well, you say it seems a lot. So let me just give you some data and
It's
some facts and
it's
some actual evidence on this, because we're just uh, pointing towards things that are vague and nebulous, right? So let me give you an actual example. So there was a big spike in divorce during the 60s and 70s, right? Um, so in the United States during the 60s and 70s, right? So going from um, going from 1960s to 1970s and 80s, there was like this huge spike in divorce. So what happened during that time? What happened during that time was the introduction of neoliberalism, okay, which basically meant stagnation of wages, okay, and with the rich getting richer, the poor getting poorer, etc. It was a bad time for the working class, union busting, etc. A decline in workers' power, basically. Okay, so stagnation in wages, okay, um, since at least 1973, right? And around the same time, there was also no fault divorce being introduced by Ronald Reagan. Okay, and what we see there is basically these women dropping their man just like that. Okay, the mass divorcing, mass deserting, right? As the male wages stagnated and declined, basically, right? And what City Crusher basically was saying with women don't like men, if these same women actually like men for innate like qualities or whatever, they would have stayed with these men even as their wages declined, right? So this is a clear example and clear evidence that the that women deselect men based on income and stuff like that. And we even have like studies showing that um, divorce rates get lower among poor Americans if there is a raise in the minimum wage. Okay, I mean it's ridiculous to say that this has nothing to do with earning potential or whatever. There's also this paper called "Increasing Pressure on U.S. Men for Income in Order to Find a Spouse," and it basically points to the fact that women's greater financial independence actually increased um, the pressure on a male spouse, right, to also have a higher income than that woman, which points to female hypergamy, right? And they also point out clearly that this is basically one of the main reasons behind the emergence of the incel phenomenon, right? So again,
You've just added that you basically added just and that is also reason of incel phenomenon, but basically
well, it's the main reason.
none of what you've said right now is like a direct like this is just you basically just telling us a story of
No, I'm
something
bringing evidence
some
to the
stuff that
table.
has happened, but basically like I've never refuted, I've never said that there is no transactional relationships, right? I've even talked about like
Yeah, but you're
since half an
contesting that
hour
this is the main
since
reason why there's an incel phenomenon. You're saying that,
since in half an hour I'm talking to you about transactional relationships, right? Like
yeah, but you're saying
I
that this
agree
has
that that
nothing to do
exists,
with
but
incels.
I'm just stating to you the fact that it seems like the less women make choices based on transactional reasons, the
Yeah, but
more
we're talking
incels
about
there
like
seem to be
five.
there. The
Yeah, but
more incels there seem to be
it's
there.
not. It's a
And
marginal.
you have
It,
agreed, let me finish. You have agreed on everything, like every premise that I've given you, you've agreed, and the conclusion follows directly from there. Like the conclusion, the reason why I'm saying it seems like, I can just explain. And I would really like to talk to you about that in general as well. Like, how do you get to facts? How do you get to conclusions out of empirical facts? Which seems to be a little problem, to be honest, in what I've seen from you so far. Uh,
no, it's not a problem. I know how basic logic works,
I mean,
but the point you're
you have
missing here
some
is that
obvious issues. Wait, let me just
no,
tell you why I'm
I don't
saying
have
what. Let
I
me
don't
just
have
tell you
any issue.
why I'm so careful in the way I'm phrasing things, because I'm actually aware of what it means, right? When I'm seeing two trends going basically in opposite directions in history,
Yeah,
that
but
doesn't directly mean that there is a negative correlation. It could be the case that other factors are so devastating that actually they that happened in the same period of time that would override the positive correlation between transactionalness of relationships and inceldom, and my conclusion could be wrong, right? That's why I'm saying it seems like. So I'm not saying that what I've told you is a one-to-one proof. It is a I think it's a strong indicator that women selecting for non-transactional reasons creates more incels. I think women selecting for sexual attractiveness uh, and for sympathy is a pretty high predictor for inceldom. You've said it yourself,
no,
and actually in one of your
I
videos,
didn't.
you've said part of it yourself. You've said that incels have a lot of problems with mental health, with a lot of like things that are
Yeah,
inherently
yeah, yeah.
wrong with their character, right?
Well, the mental health stuff feeds into their low status, right?
I mean,
So
autism is
that,
a really high predictor for inceldom.
yeah, that seems to be the case.
So, and
So
that would be a non-transactional reason for deselecting a man,
no,
right?
women don't give a shit about whether or not a man is autistic. They care about their status.
But it seems
With
like they do give a shit.
autism,
So, wait,
no.
how would that work? Like, how would that work? Do you think that it's because they're less successful in the job market and because their status is lower?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay,
They have met,
but
and
then that
also
would
like,
be but then wouldn't that be like if we look at, so I have looked into incel research, right? And basically
mhm.
the highest predictor, the like the only real predictor for uh inceldom is basically where we really have like a positive correlation is autism, where we can really say that. With the other ones we can also have correlations, but they're just basically proxies. We don't really know if they come where they come from.
Wait, so you wouldn't say that like unemployment is a proxy for inceldom?
A proxy for inceldom? You mean a cause for inceldom? Or like a
Well,
positive correlation with
it's
inceldom?
yeah, yeah, a very strong correlation
Yeah,
for like,
yeah.
yeah.
That could be,
So
yeah. That could also be
yeah,
a
but
factor, yeah.
why is that the case though? That like that proves my point. So
Do you think that people?
I don't even know.
Do you think we don't really know? We don't really know what basically. Okay, you can have someone who is not being selected for being a mate, like a spouse, right? And the same reasons why he's not being selected as a mate could also be the reason why he's not being selected as an employee, right? You do agree with that? So if you have severe social issues, you're going to have a hard time finding a job, and you're also going to have a hard time finding a spouse, right?
Sure.
Okay, so it's not really that interesting to find out that someone who's unemployed is also it's also positively correlated with being an incel, because it could just
Well,
both be
we
the
have.
symptom. It's very likely that it's just both the symptom of something else, right? That could very well be. We could not make any conclusion in one way or the other.
Well, it's a correlation, but it's a very strong one, and it's in line with a lot of data and a lot of.
Yeah, but do you see how
Uh,
we could find out which one is actually more relevant or not?
I mean,
Like we could
we
just tweak
if
we
you
could just tweak at different places in this three-year constellation. So having social problems. So you have like having social problems, right? The person has social problems. And then you have like not finding a job and not finding a spouse, right? And if we increase social problems, basically we increase we increase direct correlation between having social problems and both not finding a spouse and not finding a job, right? But then if we increase not finding a job, then we don't get such a strong correlation between not finding a job alone and not finding a spouse, and then we can basically presume that it's not only that, right?
yeah, but I think that there's research controlling for some of these factors too. So, and again,
Bro,
we
I
have
don't know what you're trying to I don't know what you're trying to get at. So I've given you like basically just an uh, uh a hint. I think we have like an something that hints to transactionalness of female to male relationships not being a good predictor for inceldom. That's the
it
hint
is
I've
though.
basically given you. Like,
No, it
but
is
you've
though.
agreed with basically everything that I said, and but I think I mean, if you have something new to add, we can talk about it more. But I think we can move on to the next point, because like I think I've made my case, and there is, I don't know, I've not seen you disagree very much, but do you want to move on, or do you want to add something more to that point? Like there is another point, because my
I
actual point is not that point.
mean, can you repeat your last point? Like, maybe I misunderstood something.
Sure. Like okay. So it seems like there is a negative correlation between woman's male to between female to male relationship being transactional and inceldom. Okay? So it seems like we have reduced the amount of transactionalness in female to male relationships in the last, I don't know, 300 years. But it seems like the amount of incels in the same time has increased. So it seems like the less women select for money, status, stuff that we would consider transactional in nature, and the more they choose for sexual attraction or love or sympathy, the more incels we have. That's what it seems like. And it could obviously be that in this period of time, something other, like something completely separate from these two things, happened that is the cause for basically this inceldom. But at least from these two data points that we're looking at, there is a negative correlation. Do you see my point? Like it's not really deep, not really that deep.
Yeah, I see your point, but again, this we still have um,
You can have
when
other
you look,
arguments. I'm not saying you can bring on other arguments. I'm not saying that this is now a closed case. You know, that's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that's so if you have other arguments, we can close this and just move on from this if you want. But just if you have some objection to that, then you can say it nowadays.
look, we're basically talking about we're talking about female hypergamy. Okay, that is still going on in whatever time period. Okay, that's the basic tendency, and that's the basic the basis of female attraction. Okay, yes, you can have like economic necessities and arranged marriages and things like that, where um, yeah, where women are more dependent on men or something, right? And now women are more like financially independent and things like that. Okay, but this and you might say, okay, women now can choose men for personality, looks, or whatever, right? But this is maybe like a marginal thing. Okay, this is not this big. Uh, the biggest driver is still the man's status and the man's income, and this is what we see in the data even today. And the reason why, again,
I think you're
this,
adding new arguments, right? Like you're trying to make like new arguments right now, right?
no,
Like you're
I'm
not
just trying
engaging
to
with
tell.
like you're not you I feel like you're not engaging with what I've said at all, which is fine, like which is totally okay. We can just move
I
on to the
am
next point.
engaging with what you said.
I don't see like any relation to like any objection to what I've said. Do you, like you
Well,
have understood what I've said, right?
well,
I think so. Like I
yeah,
think you
yeah.
understood. Yeah.
You're trying to refute that the reason why incels exist. You basically say that it has nothing or barely anything to do with women deselecting lower status men, and I think that is in error. So
I'm saying that there is. It seems like at at this point, when we can look at just these two data points, it seems like there is no correlation between women's relationships being transactional and incels being there. It seems like there is even a negative correlation there. And you've agreed with basically all of the assumptions of the. And this is not like this is just a hint at what's going on. It could be wrong. Like I'm not saying this is like 100% proof.
we would have to ask how strong this correlation is. What you're talking about, because again, we
Okay.
have. I mean, yeah, you could say that there's like an increase in the importance of men's other qualities besides their status, but the number one priority for women is still man's status.
Sure, but like listen
And
to
this is what we
listen
see in
listen
the
listen
data.
listen 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 listen. The thing that you're trying to argue against, like you're still saying stuff like, but it's still not the main factor, but it's still marginal, but it's not that
Yeah,
important. And
yeah,
what you're not getting here, what you're not why I'm saying that you're lost is that what I'm criticizing here is that uh, transactional nature of relationships being the uh, determining factor for why we have experienced a historical change. That's the thing. You can say that. You can say that. On top of that, you can still claim, which I don't believe, but you can still claim that, and we can now talk about it. You can still claim that status is the most important factor, etc., and that it's still like the number one factor, and blah blah blah, blah, and still most relationships are transactional. But just this historic change that we've seen in inceldom, that is not explainable. But that seems to not be explainable by the transactional nature of female to male relationships. So do you see the difference here? It's the difference if you say it's a main determining factor, status is a main determining factor, or if you say the transactional nature is responsible for the historic shift that we've experienced.
I mean, when we say historic shift, I'm mainly talking about like the last. I mean, when we're talking about
We've already agreed what we mean when we say a historic shift. I feel like you it's not it's not getting us anywhere if you're trying to like evade this point. Like it makes no sense. It's not even that relevant for your overall opinion. Like
Okay, I think that we have to agree to disagree on that. So can we move on?
Yeah, we can move on, but yeah, I don't know.
Again,
I think
I've
like I've already said to people, like I've had a talk with Eldrazi about this, really dear colleague of mine, and basically I'm going to tell it to you as well. Like the only honest, really warning I can give you, it doesn't look good if you agree with basically everything, and then the obvious conclusion that comes from it, you basically just say, yeah, agree to disagree, or I don't know, or act like you're agnostic and you don't know, and blah blah blah. It's just not a good look. Like it. I think it's also not a fruitful conversation.
I mean, if you say that like women select men for looks or personality,
I'm saying they do it more today than 300 years ago. That's what I'm saying. That's a huge difference.
why do we see marriage rates shifting with decline in male employment then?
That doesn't matter at all for what I'm
Why
saying.
why doesn't it matter?
Because both things can be true at the same time. It is not it is not refuting anything that I've said.
I think it is, because these women.
If women become less transactional, the previous transactional relationships that they have engaged in, they would obviously stop them, right? Like if someone has engaged in a if someone has engaged in a transactional relationship when they were 18, 20, and then they were married for 20 years, and times change and women become more independent, and now they're basically they don't care anymore. Like they want to be with the man that they actually like and not with the guy that they married for money. Then they would get divorced, right? So these things can be true at both at the same time. It's not a rebuttal to anything I've said.
I think that there's a misunderstanding here in the fundamentals. Yes, women or the relationships back then were quote unquote more transactional.
Why quote unquote? Like why would you even put, like, that's what I mean, like with it's not a good
for
look, like
reasons.
you could just like it's common sense. It's common sense. I'm sorry, I don't want to
common
interrupt you all the
sense is
time,
shitty. Common sense is shitty evidence. But anyway, the the thing is, women were more dependent on men for like survival, basically, right? More or less. Okay. Now
yeah, that's what I'm saying.
but now they're looking for not basic survival. They're looking for a surplus. They're looking for increases in status and wealth and stuff like that, right? And we have clear evidence that women forego their reproductive years and they forego marriage and all that in order to get with a high status man. So they go to universities and things like that in order to get with a higher status man. Okay, and they have. So how is this a decrease in the transactional nature?
When you say stuff, I think you should always keep in mind to ask yourself, like, how does this relate to anything he has said before? Like, how is this in how can you should ask yourself if both of these things cannot be true at the same time. Because like everything you said could still be true, while everything I've said would also be true. Like there would be no problem whatsoever. So it has nothing to do with it. I'm also like the arguments that you're making right now, I don't agree with them, and I have counter arguments for them, and I would like to have that conversation with you. But it seems like you're not disagreeing with my first point at all.
With your first point that women have more freedom to choose men for other things, yet what we see is that they barely do that though. So
Okay.
what's your point? What's your point, dude?
Okay. You don't
what's your
like
point?
I don't know. I would really love to like I just explained it again, but I feel like at this point I've already done it like 3 times, and I don't know. I think you do kind of get it. Like I don't think that you're like. I think you get this. Like it's I can say it in one sentence. Like it seems to be that like you saying that women don't choose more for non-transactional reasons is directly contradiction to what you've already agreed to. You've already agreed with me that you think that women are choosing for less transactional reasons today than back then. Why are you now like saying that you think that women don't do it?
Look, we
Like
can't.
you've already agreed with
we
this
can't.
like half an hour ago.
Look,
We can just rewind the tape. Like it's so easy. You've already agreed that women choose their spouses for less transactional reasons today than back in the days. And you also agree that there is less incels back in the days than today. There is a negative correlation here. Nothing more and nothing less. That's such an easy point. I have no idea why you're not able to just concede to that and just say, yeah, true, there is a negative correlation here. That's not an absolute proof of anything happening, but at least like it seems like it is not a good idea to cite transactionalism as a factor that contributes directly in why incels happen, right?
It depends on how strong the quote-unquote negative correlation is. If it's like a 1%er, then who cares?
What do you think? What do you think? What we have talked about right now? What is the increase in incels in percentage? From we have 90%. We have like. Would you agree with the number 90% were married back in the days?
Do you mean back in the days, like 200 years ago, or whatever?
The point in time that we have determined, half an hour ago already, where you were perfectly capable to understand all of these premises, and now all of a sudden you're not able to remember them.
So you mean 200 years ago, basically?
At that point in time, you know which point in time I'm talking about. The point in time we were both completely in accordance about. So at some point in time, 200 years ago, 300 years ago, what was the percentage of males being married? Could we agree it was around 90%, maybe? 80%? 70%? 90%? What do you think? It doesn't matter. Like we could just agree to disagree. Or we could just like, what do you think? Like at least 80%, 90%?
Again, that is. I mean, there are cases. I mean,
Dude,
they're more.
Dude,
there's
it's
more
so easy. Like there is a huge drop in men getting married from 300 years ago to today. Like that's the least contentious point ever.
Yeah.
That's like the most obvious thing ever. And you even arguing about that is insane. It's insane to me. It feels like such a waste of time. Like I don't get why you're doing this. Like
I'm not arguing, but
like,
you ask for like
you are basically
percentage.
you basically do argue about that.
No, I'm not arguing about that.
I'm asking you again. You could just say yes. You're asking what the correlation is, how strong the correlation is between transactionalness of relationships and incels, right? That was what you're saying. That was your contention with my point.
No,
you're basically saying, but we don't know. We don't know.
No,
that's what you were saying. You just said that 5 minutes ago. You said, but we don't know how strong the correlation is, right? That's what you said.
No, how strong the correlation is. You're putting words in my mouth.
What did you say? You didn't say that?
I'm asking how strong is the correlation.
You said that depends on.
Can I speak? You're interrupting.
Sure.
Constantly, right?
Go ahead.
You said like basically. My question is this to you: how strong do you think is women's selection on looks or other factors than status? Like, how strong is the increase in that?
So you want to move away from my first point? Is that correct? you want to move on to the next point and you agree with my first point? Because you're now talking about something completely different.
No, that was your entire point. You say that.
Okay, I'm not gonna do this. Like we can move on. Like it's too much. Like to be honest, like I can't repeat myself like 100 times, right? Like at some point,
Okay.
at some point I think like the people that watch this can decide what my first point was and if you have agreed with it or not and whatever. So let's go to the next point. So go ahead, give me your next point, then I can give my next point, and we can go on from there.
Yeah. So again, the basic facts of the matter remain that we see this incel phenomenon, right? Maybe there were also incels in the past or whatever, right? The thing is also that we have the internet now and we are more aware of this, obviously. So that is also a factor, right? There's like, I'm pretty sure there were homeless men back in the day, even 200 years ago, whatever. The point is, there's this underclass of men, low status men, unemployed men, disabled men, mentally ill men, etc. They are getting deselected by women, okay? And we have a lot of data that indicates that one of the main things that women look in a look for into a specific spouse is status. Okay, it's earning potential and social status, and that is not a contentious point at all. And this is basically a priority. And we have even studies showing that if women are forced to choose between things like looks and other things and status, they choose status. So if they're like, if it's like a consumption good and they only have so much money, they spend it on status, pretty much. Okay, so, but yeah, so that's basically that. We see a rise in divorce at least since the 1960s and 70s due to neoliberalism and no-fault divorce. Okay, and the neoliberalism ties back into man's status because the working class men's wage stagnated around that time. Excuse me. And yeah, so that's pretty much that. And the incel thing is tied to men's rights, actually. Not because I'm like obsessed with dating.
Wait. Just a question. I have no idea. Like, do you still know what we're talking about, right? So we're talking about
Well,
how
you said move on to the next point. I want to expand now
yeah,
from
but
incel
I
topic to
when
the
I
next
meant
point.
when I meant next point, I meant the next argument for why transactional, like women don't like men slash transactional nature of female to male attraction is not a good point and makes no sense. That was basically the next point. The next point in this discussion. That was our main disagreement that we have, right?
Yeah, you can say it makes no sense, but it does make sense actually.
Yeah,
Even
that's
if
what
even if
wait.
even if
I'm not making, when I say that, I'm not making an argument or I'm not making a thesis. I'm just telling you what we are talking about right now. Do you agree with that? But because none of what you've said had really anything to do with that. So I would just like to bring us back to the topic, what our main, which is basically our main disagreement. Do you have another point that shows that the transactional nature of female to male attraction is the reason for inceldom?
again, I laid out the arguments and the evidence. People can look up the paper. Increasing pressure on U.S. men for income in order to find a spouse. That pretty much makes my whole point. So
That's not a
I
point. That's
think that
just, you're just pointing to some data that has been collected, but you're not really making a point.
yeah, I already made that point though.
What is the point?
that at least since the 1970s and 80s, there has been a
That is
decrease in.
data. That is not a point. You should tell us what that means for the argument of the transactionalness of female to male
Look,
relationship in
if
relation to
yeah,
incels.
okay, let's simplify that. If women valued other things in men besides status and money, etc., they wouldn't divorce or deselect these men based on their income or status. And yet we find exactly that correlation. Period. End of discussion on that. Can we move on from that?
No. No, we can't move on from that.
Yeah, but I want to move on from that because it's getting redundant. It's getting redundant.
Okay, but I would like to make my second point, if that's okay.
Sure.
I think that there is the thing that you are talking about, basically, the points that you're making are all related to something that basically, like, there is this word hypergamy, right? And hypergamy is a little bit is being used in a very loose way, and but it ties back to a certain extent. It ties back to what the research actually shows. Okay, so the research shows that women tend to want, like, statistically, women tend to want men that are greater in size, stronger, more intelligent, more educated, higher wage, higher social status, etc. Right? So they
Social
usually.
status is the most important thing.
Okay, can you let me finish? Like, we already know that you were going to say that. Like, you just repeating yourself. We already know that you say that, you think that. I'm just trying to lay out my point.
Okay.
So the evidence shows that basically women want someone who is equal or higher than them in most of these regards, right?
Well, higher
Let,
usually in terms of
equal, or
status and,
the,
and
the,
money.
the evidence shows that it's equal or higher. That's what they select for in all of these areas. Okay, so now we look at transactionality, right? And I think that there is a big difference between a woman liking a man for being very successful or high in status than a woman wanting that man just to get his high status and just to profit from that, right? So in one case, she's actually like, do you think that, like, at least semantically, that there is a difference? Like, you can agree that there is a practically you think that it's the same, but do you know, like, the difference between what we would call, like, hypergamy in that sense and a gold digger, for example? Like, where
Well, that's basically the same. That's
exactly in
basically.
you think it's the same, but from my perspective, the way I look at it is like this. So there is the gold digger basically dislikes being with that man, really doesn't enjoy being with that man. Whereas in the other case, basically the status and the thing that the man has is a character trait that she actually finds attractive. So you can now think that this doesn't exist, but I would like, just like, so you don't, so basically you've just said that this doesn't exist. The second case doesn't exist. It's always the first case where the woman doesn't enjoy the company of the man, doesn't enjoy the sex with the man, is not really actually sexually attracted to that man, but is just using that man, right? That's your framework of seeing things. Because
Well,
you said
that's
that gold diggers and hypergamy is basically the same thing.
well, you that's a bit extreme what you laid out there. I mean, there are some women who like generally like the presence of a man, but yeah, there's this general tendency for women to select for higher status men, and
Bro,
um,
if you like,
but
it's really like, it's mind rot. If you just keep repeating that, it's really like, it makes no sense at this point to say it in that sentence. Like, I've asked you a very, very simple question. I've asked you, do you think that there is a difference between gold diggers and women who are hypergamous, right? And you're basically saying, yeah, but status is the most important thing, like a robot. Like you just keep repeating.
no,
Yeah.
gold digger and hypergamy relates to the same thing. It's talking
Okay.
about the same thing.
Okay, but and then I'm asking you, so what about like men are attracted to wider hips, right? And it is presumed that the reason for that is high fertility, right?
That's the hypothesis. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I think in the same way, I'm attracted to wider hips, but I'm not basically. I would never consider that a transactional thing where I am basically using my girlfriend for her wide hips, right? But it is obviously it is signaling something that I get from this, right? A transactional thing that I would get from it from an evolutionary standpoint, and also like from a survival standpoint, like from a survival of the species standpoint. But it is so ingrained into my sexuality and into my feelings for her that we would not talk about something like that. It's something being transactional, right? Would you agree, at least in that example, that there's a difference there?
Yeah, there's a difference there because a man's status is not a character trait. It's outside of him, more or less. It's related to him, but it's
What do you
outside of
think?
him.
What do you think tells people more about your personality, your status in society, or the width of your hips?
Well, I mean,
Can you answer that question, please?
I think it's a weird question.
It's a
I
very,
think,
very simple question.
well, both these things don't necessarily tell someone something about a personality.
And that's the things that make you look so bad. Like this is like the most obvious question in the world. Like what tells people more about your personality, about you as a character, about you inherently as a
Men don't
person?
choose.
Listen, wait. What tells people more about you as a person? The width of your hips or your status in society? Like you
I
not
know what you're
answering
trying
that,
to get
you
at.
not answering that makes you look so bad.
Yeah, the reason why I'm not answering that is because you try to say that basically
It
men
doesn't matter what
also don't.
follows from it. What follows from it doesn't matter. Like it's a simple question. You not being like honest enough to answer that simple question makes you look really, really bad.
No, I don't. Listen, if a man has high status, right, he can have whatever personality.
You don't want to
Okay.
answer that question. So you really want to, for the record, you're not going to answer that question, right?
Well, I answered that question in a way that basically says, look, personality is not necessarily correlated to either of these things. That is my answer.
So you don't think people would have more of an understanding who you are as a person by getting the information on your status in society versus this width of your hips?
I mean, all
You're
else.
actually going to try to bite that bullet? That's insane.
I mean,
That's insanity.
all else being equal, sure, people might say that the status hints more at the personality than the other thing. But
I mean,
that's a
obviously,
really,
right? I mean, obviously, right?
yeah.
And
But
then
what's your
and
point?
then the point
What's your
is
point?
that I asked you, do you think that someone would say that I am being transactional for liking white hips? And your answer to that was, you again didn't answer my question. Your answer to that was, yeah, but status is something that is outside of your personality, suggesting that hips were something that was inside your personality.
No, that's a false dichotomy.
You said
You're.
that.
No, I
I'm just
didn't say
repeating
that.
what you said. I'm just repeating what you said.
I didn't say that
Okay,
hips
then
have something to do with personality.
we
I
just
didn't say
rewind.
that.
We just rewind. Like
No, you're strawmanning Matt, and it's.
we just rewind. Let's
Listen.
just rewind. I can just ask you again. So if I choose, if I find my girlfriends, if people find out that I am actually always choosing the girls with the wider hips, right? Would people be justified in calling me like? Would people be justified in saying that I am just using these women for their wide hips?
No, you have a preference for that. It's that simple. You're
Because it's not something that I'm actively like. It's not some calcul that I'm doing. Like it's not some calculation that I'm doing, right? Like it's already ingrained into my sexuality, where wide hips is basically a proxy for fertility. But at the
yeah,
end of the
sure.
day, that's not the way I'm looking at it. And I believe that status or wealth, for example, is in the same way something that is basically a proxy from nature that is basically hinting at something
Yeah,
in woman, and
well,
basically then for that reason is basically something that is actually attractive. So when someone
so
says
what you say? Okay, let me ask you this. Okay, I get what you say here.
great,
You could have just gotten to that faster, to be honest.
if you would have answered
So
honestly, we would have gotten to there way faster.
yeah,
I
so
wouldn't
would you
have to
say?
like scroll back the whole time. Sorry,
So
go
when
ahead.
you look at high status men like Elon Musk, what do you think about their personality?
No, I don't see how you can do this. Like just switch
I
from
mean, you
topic to
say,
topic. I'm.
you
You
say that
said you
high
said that
status
you
hints
don't
at a
believe that
man.
there is a difference between gold diggers. You said I asked you a question. I was trying to make a point. So I asked you, do you think that there is a difference between gold diggers and hypergamy and hypergamous behavior, right? And you said no, it's basically the same, right? Do
Yeah,
you
it's
remember
pretty much
that?
the same.
Do you
Yeah,
remember that? Okay, but
yeah,
now we found out that actually for men you do make that distinction, and it seemed like you were also
yeah.
agreeing that hypergamy is actual attraction and is to be differentiated to like gold digger behavior, where the woman
No.
doesn't actually enjoy being with the man, where the woman actually just wants to use that man for wealth and status.
Well, women are attracted to that wealth and status, but I don't understand what you mean by you make the distinction for men because
Do,
the
do you,
woman's
yeah.
the woman's like physical attractiveness or whatever, that is still part of her being, right? So the man's
I mean,
status,
when you
he can
yeah.
lose that. He's like, or he has to fight for that. It is something that is provided. It is a service in a sense, right?
When you say being, like it is more part of your being, right? Like that was the thing with the hips and your status, right? So when you say it says more about your being, I think we would all agree that
It doesn't
can
say
you
more about your being. I didn't say that, right? But
you
in
just
general,
wait, what did you
men
didn't you just
look.
say didn't
You
you just say
overcomplicate.
didn't you just say that
What did I say?
didn't you just say that women's looks are more part of their being in comparison to men's status? Not right? That's what you just said.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and then I'm asking you, if I would ask you as a person, like, are the things that you have done in life, the position in which you've been, the social circles you are in, the social relationships that you have, are those more indicative of who you are as a person or the way you look?
I mean, men don't just choose women for looks, by the way.
Dude,
But
can you just answer that question? Like, it drives me really, like, it drives me nuts. It's crazy how
yeah, you
it's
want yes or no
I
for
mean,
a very
it's a
complicated
very
question.
it's not a complicated question at all. Like
Actually, it is.
no one watching this thinks that this is actually complicated. Everyone watching this will think, dude, obviously, like things that hint at my personality are way more me than the way I look.
Yeah, but you could just be born into wealth. So
that would still tell you more about my personality. It would
really,
tell you something about my socialization. It would tell you about the people I associate with. It would tell you something about my education. It would tell you something about my ethical frameworks in which I operate, right?
no, not necessarily.
Okay.
I mean, maybe a socialization, maybe, but
Okay.
and
All right.
but
So you think it's more you as a person are tied, your identity as a person is tied more to your looks,
I
to
didn't
your
say that.
physical appearance? That's what you've said 5 minutes ago.
No, no, I didn't say that. You're straw manning me mad. So again, to simplify the
Crazy.
overall point, men choose women more for things that they basically are, right? Not just in terms of looks, like forget about the looks, right? But they just like women inherently more, right?
That's what
They
we're
want to
talking
be
about.
with,
That's what is contentious. You just saying shit that you just ran away from. You basically ran away
no,
from the discussion. You basically just ran away from
I
the discussion.
no.
What's more
You're
tied to
straw
your
manning me.
identity? That's not a straw man. I'm just saying, telling you what you're doing in the conversation. That's not a straw man. I'm having a meta conversation right now. So you're running away from the conversation,
I'm not.
which is the conversation that we're having, is the discussion, the disagreement that we have is what is more tied to and what is more definitive of your identity as a person, your looks, or outside fact like your status and stuff like that. And I am and then basically you're running away from this and just stating that that's not the case. And we are still stuck at that point.
So let's again. So if Elon Musk lost all his wealth, you think that women would be interested in him? Like let's say
Do you know
he's
that I believe that,
bankrupt.
do do you know
Answer the question.
do you think that I don't believe,
Answer the question.
do you know,
Answer the question.
do you think,
Answer the question.
do you think
Answer the question. If Elon Musk lost his wealth overnight, do you think
yeah,
women would be interested in it?
how, like, first of all, probably yes, because he used to be the most richest man in the world. A lot of women would be like, wow, this is like one hell of a guy, crazy guy.
Well, so it is tied to wealth and status then.
you
I thought
you
it
were
was all
trying to
about
make
personality.
you're trying to make an example where him losing his wealth would result in him not having any woman, but obviously,
Okay,
like,
let's say he never had any wealth.
dude, what do you do you really think that I don't believe that there is transactional relationships? Do you really think
Well,
that?
well, you're trying to sort of say,
Do you
um,
think that I think that there is no transactional relationships in the world?
I mean, get clear on what you want to say. Do you want to say
I'm
that
asking you a question,
other
like,
things?
because what you're saying is like so random that I
No,
would really
it's
like to
not
know.
random.
I would really like to know, like, do you think, like, do you think my point is that there is no transactional relationships?
I think your point is that women also have like other criteria that they value in a man.
So that's not my
Which I
point,
never.
right? So that's not my point. You can just say no, I don't think that. So that's not my point, right?
Yeah, that's maybe not your point, but
So
you're trying to.
why would you ask me, like, why would you ask me trying to create an example of a transactional relationship and ask me what I would think about that transactional relationship? Obviously, I think that there exists that there's transactional relationships that exist.
Right, but you're trying to say that these women, they, there's like the character attached to that status, but if that was was women value that character because the status is hinting at the character or whatever in a man. But
I
if a
am
man
saying,
lost his,
yeah,
don't interrupt me.
yeah,
But if a
sorry.
man lost his status, then he wouldn't like immediately lose his character traits, right? So obviously, women do value what men bring to the table outside of any character traits.
I mean, first of all, like
And
the
that's proof of
evidence.
that, basically.
First of all, the evidence points to men actually losing a lot of their character traits when they lose their status. It is actually a very big issue for men when they lose. I mean,
What do you mean by that?
I mean, it is pretty the correlation between like losing your job and becoming depressed and having like mental health issues is pretty obvious for obvious
Wait,
reasons.
so that is losing your character traits, becoming depressed?
Yes,
So you
obviously.
become a
Like
less moral.
if
So
you're
if you're
if you're if
depressed, you
you're
become a
if
less
you're
moral person,
if you're becoming a
for
what?
example. So
No.
if you become
Yeah,
depressed, you become a less moral person. Is that what you're saying?
You might become a worse human being. Yeah, definitely. If you're under a lot of stress, if you're highly depressed. I mean, obviously, like a guy that is like
But
really happy-go-lucky and like making jokes and is like a really charming person could become like a very depressed and person that is like not really fun to be around. That's just sad facts of reality. Like I'm not saying that anyone should be
that's not.
abandoned because of that, but that's just a
Yeah,
fact. So
yeah.
if you lose your job,
That's not.
there is a big correlation between losing your job and suffering from mental health issues, and suffering from mental health issues is usually correlated with losing your social relationships, and marriage is part of that. So
Yeah,
I don't know
that
what
would
you're
actually
getting
be
at, man.
true.
I have no idea what you're getting at, what your point
Yeah,
is.
yeah. Okay, let's
It's
just
just
move
a
on from that
random
because
example.
no,
So
it's
so
not.
so so
So
the thing that you still haven't really I don't think you've even understood my point. So
look, look.
my
I
point
get your
is,
point. I get your point. You
what is
say
my
that
point?
yeah, you say that men's status hints at their personality, which
No, I'm saying that
maybe,
basically
but
you no, I'm saying that there is a double standard where when you're evaluating what men's preferences are in women, in that regard, you are basically not suspecting transactionalness. But
well,
when it comes to women, then you immediately jump to it being transactional. And I'm again asking you because I'm still not quite sure what your answer is on that. I feel like you've changed your mind on it a couple of times. Do you think that there is a difference between a gold digger and between a woman who's actually attracted to successful men?
look, let me address the part of the double standard
Can you
because
please
you're
answer that question, man? It's like really not that, it's not that deep. You can just give your opinion. You don't even have to like, it's not even a knowledge question that I'm asking you. I'm just asking your opinion. Like it's not that I'm asking you like for some scientific fact.
you mean like a woman who's not making a sort of calculated move, but is um just subconsciously attracted to high status men? Is that what you're asking?
Yes. Do you
Yeah,
think that exists? Do you
sure,
think that exists?
sure, sure. So what?
Wait,
But that,
what is the sure? What are you? So
yeah,
you think that that
they're
exists, and that there is a difference between a woman
yeah, but
being
yeah, but it's a marginal difference because the calculation, one is conscious and one is more subconscious. So who cares? This is a moot point,
I
and
mean,
we are arguing.
would you not care? Like, would you not care if you were that man? Like, I think I would care a lot. Like, if it's just if it's a woman that doesn't want to be in my company and just is with me for getting something from me, that's a huge difference to a woman.
One is conscious and one is subconscious. Again,
You as a
we don't.
person, you as a person, what like I think that's again, it's so obvious. Like you as a person, how would you feel about a woman being sexually attracted to you because you're really successful versus a woman who's just hanging around with you because she wants to get your money? Like there is a huge
Yeah,
difference,
I don't.
right?
No, no, there's not a huge
No?
difference.
Okay, is
No.
there a huge difference between a man who wants to have the best offspring, who's basically has a plan to create like a perfect offspring, and who's like walking around measuring like hip size in women, and who's like just selecting a woman and he doesn't even find her attractive, and just selects her for breeding purposes and then impregnates her, versus a guy who's genuinely attracted to white hips? Do you think that there is a marginal difference, or that there is a huge difference between that?
Again, this is basically driven for the same evolutionary reasons, and one is more conscious and one is more subconscious.
Okay,
And
is there a
again, I'm not even in,
is it the marginal difference from
yes.
an ethical perspective and from a practical perspective as well?
I mean, listen, ethical is like subjective, so I don't listen. I'm not even interested in that conversation anymore, to be honest. Let's move on from that, because I'm getting tired of that, to be honest.
Okay.
I'm not here to talk about dating, actually. I'm a men's rights activist. I want to make a broader point about incels, because men's rights are being trampled on, and you keep talking like hours on end about things that don't matter, actually, all that much.
Sure.
Right?
So wait, let me just wait. You can talk in a second. So let's just conclude this topic. It's fine if you're tired. That's totally all right. We can. Yeah, what would you like to talk about next?
Yeah. So men's rights and the incel topic. Let's talk about that. So.
But you're not going to talk about the past topics, because if you do that, then I'm going to get mad, because you already gotten away from that.
Yeah, I just the only clarifying question I want to hear is what do you mean by double standard? Men have like a double standard.
Okay, so we don't close the. Okay, sure. So
yeah, that's the only thing I want to clarify.
Okay, sure, no problem. So I asked you before, the reason why I'm saying double standard is I asked you before if there is a difference between gold diggers and hypergamy. And you said there is no difference. It's basically the same.
Mm-hmm.
Then I asked you if you think that me being attracted to white hips is transactional, and like and you said no, that's basically like me actually wanting her, not being transactional about it. And that's why I've said that there is a double standard there, because gold digger implies that it's transactional in nature, right? And hypergamy implies that there is an actual sexual interest there, and you equating that in one case, but in the other case you basically removing transactionalness from the sexual attraction. That, I think, is a double standard.
So transactional, we mean
quid pro quo.
Yeah. So we need. I mean that in an economic sense, right?
Sure.
So if someone is attracted to hips, that has nothing to do with economics, right?
No, it's in the sense of I get X out of it, right? So I get value X out of it. That's why I'm doing it, right? So we have these two cases, right? Like basically like 4 cases technically. So in one case, a woman is sexually attracted. She sees a man, a very successful man, and she's sexually attracted to that man. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
She's not thinking about, oh, I can get so much money out of him. I can buy a Birkin bag, I can buy X, I can buy Y. Okay? She's not thinking that. She's genuinely sexually attracted to that guy because he's very successful. Him being very successful is a proxy for her, like evolutionarily, and like in the same way as I am attracted to larger hips for reasons of fertility. She is attracted to successful men because of provider capabilities, right? But it's not a one-to-one calculation where she's thinking, I can get money from him, I can get some X from him. And in the same way, for me, it's not a one-to-one calculation where I think, I can get like healthy babies from her. I'm planning on impregnating her immediately, right? That's not the thoughts that go on in my mind. Obviously, these are like subconscious cues to a certain extent, but it's so so far away from what I'm basically from any calculation that we would not talk about a transactional nature here. I think that there is a big difference between a gold digger who is actually looking at a guy, seeing that he's successful, and thinking, if I am with him, I can get a nice handbag, I can get some money, and I don't have to worry about life, basically, right? So, and I think these two things are completely different. And in the same way that me calculating for the most healthy partner to make babies with, and me just being
But
with
men are
her for
not
that.
like that. But that's where you're mistaken. Men are not like that. Men
Wait,
have
wait.
very low
Let's that
standards.
that doesn't really matter. I'm just asking you for if you would see that, what you would say about that, like what the difference here is. And in one case, you're perfectly able to make the difference, and you're perfectly able to separate these two cases out. And in the other case, you are not able to make the difference, and that's the double standard. You asked me for the double standard, and I'm explaining to you what I think is the double standard. If it's very common or if it's not common is
I mean,
not, it's besides the point. It's
I
your
mean,
answers,
in the
it's your
gold,
answers that count, basically.
in the gold digger case, it's more consciously calculated, and in the other case, it's more subconscious. But the transactional nature is in the effect what is actually going on, not in the like, oh, women are like maliciously planning or whatever type way, or like Machiavellian calculations on their part or whatever. The general dynamic is what is transactional, right? That is the thing that makes it more transactional.
I didn't
So
understand what you said there, to be honest. Sorry.
right, so women tend to choose higher status men, right?
You love you at least I don't know
So
how many times you've said that. You love just saying
right,
that. And it's like your go-to answer for everything I said so far.
wait, you asked me to clarify what I said, and I want to
Yeah,
clarify
what
that.
you but you know what you're clarifying, right? What you're clarifying is uh what is the double, like, in what way is it
I
not a
already
double
explained that.
standard? In what way is it not? Yeah, and I didn't understand that, to be honest. Like, in what way is it not a double standard if in one case you're perfectly able to make the difference between a gold digger, between a person that is calculating for perfect offspring and a guy attracted to white hips, and versus gold digger and hypergamy? Like, in one case you're perfectly able to distinguish these things, in the other you're not.
Okay, when we're talking about the general case, men don't really calculate for healthy offspring. So
I've presented you
okay,
with two scenarios, and in these two scenarios, you're not able to do that. It's not important what actually happens or not.
I mean, okay, in these two scenarios, Ryan, you could say in a very basic sense, yeah, they're trying to get something out of them or whatever, Ryan. Even though you could argue that the the offspring is actually for both the man and the woman, right? So it's not it's like it's actually not the same as
But that's
women
not what
getting
the
money
person is.
from the man.
The
So
person is
it's
not doing it to create an offspring for the woman. He's creating. The dishonesty is that
no,
it's not
it's they
about that
both have
person.
offspring.
But
They
it's not
both have
about that
offspring.
person. The intention, the act can have positive outcomes for the woman as well, but the act hasn't been done for that purpose. It has been done for selfish purposes.
Yeah, okay. Then if something is done for selfish purposes, you could say that about any sort of relationship. So that's not a productive conversation to have, to be honest. I'm talking about the general effect, the general dynamic. So women, they receive money from men, right? In order, so men basically bribe the women in order to have them in their life. That's the basic transactional nature that that I was alluding to. So can we move on from that now? Now that's clarified.
Yes, we can move on.